Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine. I'm sitting here in the beautiful Russian River Valley of Sonoma in Olivet Grange. That's the vineyard here at Inman Family Wines, and I'm with Kathleen Inman, the owner and winemaker. Welcome, Kathleen, and tell us a little bit about Inman Family Wines and where we are.
Yes, well, we're here at my place that is right in the heart of Sonoma County's Russian River Valley. I started Inman Family Wines in 2002, but I actually developed this Olivet Grange vineyard in 2000. I purchased the land in 99, and I have 10 and a half acres here that I farm organically, mostly Pinot Noir and a little bit of Pinot Gris.
And how many cases of wine are you producing each year?
So up to about 60,000 bottles, so that's about 4,800 to 5,000 cases.
And you said Pinot Noir and a little Pinot Gris. Anything else? And what markets are you in?
Yes, so my wines are available all over the U.S. They're represented by Brabant Selections, but the majority of my wines are sold directly to consumers through my website, inmanfamilywines.com, and through visitors coming here to the winery to taste with me. So in addition to Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, I also purchase some Chardonnay and some Pinot Noirs from some other vineyards that are in different neighborhoods of the Russian River.
And with that, I know you're making a rosé of Pinot Noir, but also some sparkling wine, right?
Indeed. I've started making sparkling in 2009. And this year I'm actually adding Blanc de Blanc to the portfolio. I make Brut Rosé as well as Blanc de Noir, and I've just started with Chardonnay doing a blend that's not been released yet, and now I'm going to do a pure Blanc de Blanc because I do like a good Blanc de Blanc.
I'm excited to try them.
I know, except you have to wait because, my wines, the sparklings, are minimum of 18 months on the yeast, and most of them are 3 years before I release them, so you have to have patience. But I do have some new rosés coming out, too. My Endless Crush Rosé that I started making in 2004 is, a hugely popular wine and sells out very quickly, and so I've been trying to increase production to meet the demand, and this year I'm actually adding 2 new rosés to the lineup so that I'll have 3 single vineyard rosés, which I'm not sure I know of anybody who's making single vineyard rosés, at least a lineup of them, which really will feature, I try this with all my wines, to really feature the place. It's important to me to make wines that represent the vintage and the place, and that's more important than anything else, really. And so it's going to be fun to see how these perform as rosés.
I'm very excited. So tell me, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Well, I grew up in a family in Napa, in the Napa Valley, that didn't really drink alcohol. So I didn't have a lot of wine memories as a child, and wasn't really allowed to ever taste anything at home. But when I got to university, I remember, I think my very first and best wine memories are of some fantastic German Rieslings that my good friend Sally's family were collectors of Rieslings, and Sally would go back to her home in LA and come up to Santa Barbara where we were at college together, and she would bring some of these wines that, from the early 70s, and this was the early 80s, so they were, nice, mature Rieslings, mostly Spätleses, and I was like, oh my gosh, these are so interesting. And the combination of the minerality and the petrol noses, I was just really excited by those.
Yeah, so I would say that if your first memory of wine is also some of the most memorable wine you've ever drunk, that's not a bad way to start.
No, that's a kind of a common theme. The first port that I ever had was a Croft 1966, followed by a Taylor's 1955, 2 of the best vintages in the last century. So start as you mean to go on is what I like to say.
Well, you started on a good note.
Indeed. I'm very fortunate.
So traveling the world abroad, what is the best foreign wine you've ever drunk?
Oh my gosh, that is a really tough question because I travel, having lived in the UK for 16 years and belonged to the Wine Society. So we had wines from all over the world, but particularly all over Europe that we were tasting. And then, of course, we travel, and wines always taste fantastic when you're having them in the region. But you know what? One of the wines that really is most memorable to me is the first time I had a Provençal rosé in Provence at the Gorge du Verdon, and we were sitting out having a picnic, and I'd had rosés, but I hadn't really had
good
rosés. And it was kind of an epiphany. But the interesting thing, we bought some more of that particular rosé. And when we brought it back to Yorkshire in the north of England on a dreary grey day, it didn't quite taste the same as it did looking out at the beautiful scenery of Provence and the smell of the verbena and lavender in the air at the same time as you were having the wine. But anyway.
Yeah, that tends to happen. The experience is part of what makes a wine taste so good. Do you remember the worst one you've ever had?
Oh my gosh. It might be one, and certainly the one with the worst wine with the worst name, a double whammy, was in Paris when I was a student and was really poor. And so we had this, I can't remember, it was before France was on euros, but I mean, it was dirt cheap, like at the supermarket, and it was called Vin de Clapies, which we thought was hilarious. And it was so bad that you could not drink it. It was so bad. It was only like a few sous. I mean, it was like the cheapest thing in the whole supermarket, and there was a reason. And with a name like that, it's kind of like that old Saturday Night Live comedy skit about with a name like Fluckers.
Yeah.
Yes, we won't go there.
So obviously that is an exception to French wine, but among all the...
Oh, yes. You did ask me the worst.
No, but I was going to say, among all the populations of the world, who do you think drinks the best wines?
Gosh, I think the English, I think the British drink the best. I think that they've always had a habit of choosing some of the best wines, and whether you're talking about in the 18th and 19th century when they brought them back to England and bottled them there. I mean, the English invented champagne.
It's true.
Sparkling wine is from England, I should say. If it wasn't for their glass technology, wouldn't have had that. So I would say the British drink best.
And I know you drink your own wine and other wines that are local, but you probably have a cellar. And in your cellar, what would you say is giving you the most satisfaction? And on that note, what's your most expensive wine in there? And perhaps that's the one giving you the most satisfaction.
Oh, gosh. I have to tell you, we purchase a lot of wines and we drink a lot of wines, and I don't pay attention to the price of them. Once I have bought them, I totally forget how much I paid for them. I really do. I mean, I know I have, again, through the Wine Society, we buy first the combination packs of the top 6 first growth Bordeaux's, or the top 6 Rhones, or the Grand Crus. So we have a lot of those that we have, and then we just drink them. But grower champagne is probably my biggest passion, really. And there's no one producer. I'm just constantly trying different ones, and I was really disappointed when our flat recently was broken into.
Oh, no.
What did the burglars steal at the Inmans? A bottle of Grand Cru grower champagne, which he drank, this burglar, he got caught, drank the whole bottle in my flat, and he couldn't even get the cork out properly. So he had he'd torn off the top part, because he wasn't used to opening champagnes. And he pushed the rest of the cork into the bottle and was drinking it while he was burglarizing. And then he took a bottle of Talisker single malt with him for the road.
Well, at least he has good taste.
I know, but I was like, I had that bottle waiting for when I next arrived in the fridge, and he just took it out. So only but I don't really pay attention, is really, to answer that question, to how much they cost. I just enjoy them when I find them. And I'm a big fan. My favorite California producer, and give her a plug because she's a wonderful person, is Pam Starr, Crocker & Starr, and it's the only wine club I belong to. And so I drink her wines. I particularly love her Cabernet Franc, but I love the Stone Place Cuvée as well. So when we don't drink Inman wines at home that often, except the bubbles.
Well, I know that Pam is very passionate about Cabernet, and you're very passionate about Pinot Noir, but I'm curious if you think that there is such thing as a perfect variety.
I don't think I do, because I think different wines go with different foods, with different moods. Sometimes I want a more rustic wine. I don't want something super elegant. And there's a time when you just want something very hearty and fun. And then there's another time when you really do want something that's very delicate and that you can pay attention to and that commands your attention. But if you had to choose one, it would have to be Pinot Noir.
Of course. Because
it can be a rosé, it could be a sparkling wine, or it can be an elegant red wine. And so Pinot, to me, is the perfect varietal.
I know this is sort of a challenging question to many, but what is your opinion about wine critics and scores?
Well, when I was younger, when I was first starting, I have never been a fan of following things just because they got good scores. I've always relied on word of mouth and sort of more general reputation rather than any individual wine getting a score. And so when I first started, I refused to send my wines for any reviews. And it wasn't until I'd been going for quite a few years that I started to allow people to score the wines. I mean, in the early days, I won't mention them here, but some very well-known critics tasted my wines and they were like, these are amazing. And I said, well, you can't write about them because I have a no scores policy. And just because you're going to say something nice doesn't mean that I just don't believe in a score. And part of that was always because, I still believe this actually, wines are living things and they go through different phases. So often when the critics are wanting to get samples of the wines, they're babies. Mm-hmm. And to me, to give them a review is like looking at a sonogram and trying to determine the facial features of the baby you're going to have when they're 15 years old. Mm-hmm. You can't look at something at one point and really, truly know, no matter how experienced a taster you are, you can't forecast what's coming down the road. And so, by the time a wine is a little more mature and then you can say something about it, the critics don't want to review those anymore. And so because I hold my wines in barrel for 2 years and a year in bottle, I'm always out of sync with reviewers anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of
a moot
point. Exactly what I was going to say.
So as a consumer, what is your preference, red, white, or rosé?
I want to say sparkling, though. You didn't offer me sparkling.
The next question was still or sparkling, so I knew the answer to that.
Yes. So, well, I think red. I think I would say red.
Red. And then, of course, I know the answer between still and sparkling is sparkling, and I know the answer of sparkling is champagne over other sparkling wines.
No, you would be wrong.
Even with the grower champagne love.
I don't know. I have a huge love and respect for champagne, but I have been having a fling with English fizz, and I am pretty committed to English sparkling wine, and I kind of wish we hadn't moved from England to the Russian River Valley, because maybe I'd be making sparkling wine in the UK. I was actually hoping I might get to go and help with harvest there this year, and I booked my ticket, but of course they've had a really hot summer and they're harvesting right now just when I'm harvesting. So by the time I get there, the winemaker that I was going to work with, she said, well, you can come help barrel down. And I'm like, I don't need to help do that. I just wanted to play with the fruit.
Right. Well, tell me, when it comes to the rules about food and wine pairing, do you feel that it's important to follow them? White wine, fish, red wine, meat, or how do you feel about those food and wine pairing rules?
Oh, I throw the rules out. I think that the best pairings are when you pay attention to the flavors and the weights of the food. Mm-hmm. So it's about weight, it's about the texture. I don't think there are fast rules for white with fish. And although I think there are a lot of white wines that do go fantastically with fish, but maybe I wouldn't have a bar sack with a steak, or there's some things that I think you can't go. But once again, sparkling wine goes with everything.
I would agree with that. So what do you think that a non-drinker loses out by not tasting or drinking your wine?
That's an odd question. I don't know. obviously I want people to taste my wine, and I think they'd be missing out on something that is a kind of a unique representation. Since I make natural wines, I don't have a philosophy of trying not to add any water or acid or enzymes or tannins or any of these other things that get added to wines, because I really want to make wines that represent the place. So, people are missing out on my interpretation of what the place tastes like.
Mm-hmm. So, space aliens land on your property. Which of the wines from your cellar are you going to give them to taste?
Oh, I'm going to ask them to taste the estate Pinot Noir. I refer to it as the baby I give birth to every year. So it would be like giving them a little piece of me.
So every vintage tells a different story. I think you'd agree with that. Do you think that there are more things that repeat themselves or not?
I mean, every vintage is so unique. And sometimes you think you're about to have one that you recognize, this is like this year, and then something else happens, Do you have any good luck rituals when harvest is about to start? Oh, yes, I have rituals.
Will you share any of them?
We are a family of rituals. We have different things we do for certain times. Like when we've been on a trip, the first meal we always have is a curry. We have to do that. And then when it's harvest, rosé or sparkling are one of the first things we start with. And certainly when I make rosé, I have to destem the fruit, leave it to sit, and then go and have 2 tacos. It's always, and that is when people say, so how long, Kathleen, do you leave your Endless Crush Rosé on the skins to get this beautiful color? And I say, it's the time it takes me to go to the taqueria, have 2 tacos, and then return and start the press. And it's very scientific, but that is a total ritual.
I like that ritual. Very unique and not one I've heard from anyone else.
There you go.
Do you capture any signs or omens that will predict the outcome of what harvest will be?
I mean, every year is different, but I do pay attention to things, like the way the trees and the things are at. Like this year has been a very unusual year. It was a nice, steady, warm summer, and as we approached what has become the harvest window, I mean, when I first started, we started, maybe we harvest Pinot Gris the after Memorial Day weekend, but we weren't doing, unless you were doing sparkling, you weren't harvesting in August. And now I've had vintages where I'm finished by the second week, like this year. I'll probably be finished the second week of September. I'm kind of going on one of those tangents. But the reason I started on it is so different. It seemed to me that it was going to be a bit like 2011 at first. I felt like we're maybe going to come to some rain. The weather feels like it could be coming. I mean, we had this long period where it was only 70 to 75 degrees in the day for like 2.5 weeks. And all the grapes sort of stalled out in terms of their sugar production, but they continued to lose their acidity. And so it's very interesting to see what kind of wines are made this year. I feel it's in many ways like the 2005 vintage, where a lot of people kept waiting and kind of missed the boat, because after a certain time, I mean, yes, people can add tartaric acid to wines, but if the pH gets too high, they won't bind properly. And so you have a lot of wines that throw a lot of tartrates as they go. But people who decided to, regardless of what the sugar were, to go because it tasted good and while it still had acid, made really fantastic wines. Mm-hmm. And this year is reminding me a lot of that now. It's, I picked Pinot Noir, the bulk of my Pinot Noir already. And if you look at if you were just going on the numbers, if you ignored the bricks, the sugar level, mm-hmm. you would say, boy, these are perfect wines. But yet it's going to mean they'll have alcohol of 11.5 to 12.5%.
Sounds beautiful.
It does.
So many producers walk in their cellars and they speak to their barrels or to the wine in the barrels. Do you talk to your wine? And if so, what do you say to it?
I do. I talk to them as their grapes. Because I'm not just my own vineyard, but the vineyards I work with, I have long-term contracts on the same blocks. And so I tell them encouraging words. You're doing a good job, looking good, or come on, hurry up. You're uneven. I don't want to have to snip you off, and that sort of thing. And then in the cellar, I usually play music to my grapes while the must is turning into wine. And in the barrels, I don't know. I talk to them sometimes like, oh, good job. But it's not as intimate as I am with the actual grapes. Because, I call myself a grape groper. I'm going around giving them a little squeeze as well. So it's not quite the same as... I love my grapes. I even have, tattoos of grapes on my... Yes.
When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, it changed a lot. When I was really little, I wanted to be a teacher. And then I think when I was in middle school, I saw myself as a oceanographer or a meteorologist. I've always been interested in the weather. So I was starting to say, and then I got sidetracked. I do look at the Farmer's Almanac, and I look at past weather things when I'm trying to predict what's happening. And I think that's a interest as a kid in the weather.
Yeah, and to find those patterns.
Yes, exactly.
And when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
What free time? That would be my one. Well, I have 2 beautiful grown daughters, and when I have free time, I like to go and visit them. One lives in England, and one lives on the East Coast of the U.S., and spend time with my husband, Simon.
And what is your favorite film dedicated to wine?
I mean, it's not. I can tell you what it's not. It's not Bottle Shock, which I really didn't like at all. And... it's not Sideways, although I do like the little reminiscing scene where they're talking about how each vintage has memories of what happened and the people. I like that. And it's not totally the Russell Crowe movie but I kind of like elements of that. I don't really have a favorite wine film. I mean, I'm more of a Love Actually I have to watch all the time. Rocky Horror Picture Show I have seen more than 50 times.
But no wine in those.
No wine in those.
And do you have a favorite...
In fact, when they say a toast in Rocky Horror, I used to throw toasts at the screen. So, no wine.
No wine. And do you have a favorite singer or group?
I have so many. I like... I listen to a lot of indie rock, and I always have. So I like things from the past of, whether it's... The Clash from when I was in high school, or Alt J, who I listen to now, or all sorts of bands. I like new things all the time.
For a really romantic evening, which wine would you order?
Well, that depended on what I was eating. But the most recent lovely evening I had, it was a bottle of 2000 En Rio, which was quite nice. I hadn't had any of their wine age, and it was really lovely. I had it with some truffled potato chips, and it was perfect.
That sounds like
Those
perfect
Torres,
pairing.
Potato chips from Spain. Yum.
What was the best piece of advice you ever received?
It's really funny.
That's okay.
Never tie down another man's load. Or not to let them tie yours. My mentor, winemaker Kevin Hamill, told me that was one of the things his mentor told him. And when you're a small winery, you have to move your stuff around a lot because you maybe are borrowing stuff and whatnot, and learning to tie trucker's knots and tie down your stuff. Because one time I let someone else do it, and I got off on the road, and suddenly it was like I was going to lose my barrels. And so that was a really good bit of we laughed about that advice, but actually
it was
quite useful.
Yeah, real advice. And if you were going to give us some advice, what would you tell us?
To be adventurous in wines. And I really, when people say, oh, I don't like Chardonnay, I'm not going to try it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, try it and explore new varietals, but don't be right now, I think there's a tendency of people to fixate on finding the newest thing. And like new, something that people aren't making a lot of is going to be better than something else. There are sometimes reasons people are not growing a lot of certain grapes, and maybe focusing on it and thinking it's cool just because it's not widely planted. I don't think my advice is ignore that trend. Mm-hmm. And, yes, don't shy away from new things, but don't leave the the tried and true.
Right. Yeah. Now, you've accomplished a lot, but what would you say your proudest achievement in your work is?
In my work, yeah, because obviously you know what I was going to say. It was my girls. But I think as I been doing this a while, I feel pretty good about having planted a vineyard on a virgin piece of land and started a new wine brand, and to have built it up so that it employs other people, and it donates a lot to charities and the community. And I don't know, I think I should be. I often don't think about that, but
I think you should be proud.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
So complete the sentence. A table without wine is like
a day without sunshine.
Perfect. If a VIP photograph was photographed by paparazzi in a restaurant, it could be anyone from any walk of life, and in the background of that photo was a bottle of your wine, who would you want that person to be?
Oh, gosh. I don't really think about celebrities like that. I don't know. I'm just happy to see anybody drinking my wine. And to be honest, not to be trite, I really feel that what I like is, with social media nowadays, is being able to see people enjoying my wine, period. And, it used to be before we had that, people would sometimes send me photos of them bringing my wine to somewhere on holiday, in Hawaii or Cancun, a bottle of my rosé on the beach or something. And I think I get more of a kick out of knowing someone had my wine when they got engaged, and that was the wine that they were drinking when they proposed. Those things are more, I honestly can't think of someone.
That's fair.
I mean, it was kind of cool when I heard that the president and Secretary Clinton were having my wine at some restaurant, and the somm who sold it to them were like, this, and I thought that was cool, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a photo of that.
Do you think we'll still be drinking wine in 100 years, 200 years, or more's time?
Gosh, I think we've always been drinking wine, so it's hard to imagine that we couldn't. But I think if we keep treating our planet as badly as we are, and climate change happens, we'll maybe be having to, plant grapes in the what is the Arctic in order to get with changes in climate. So it might change the styles of wine that we, but it's hard to, I don't think that far out.
Name 3 wines you would take with you to a deserted island.
Well, I probably would take some Krug with me. And then, I don't know, I'm a big fan of Bandol, so I might take a Tempier and maybe a bottle of Inman Olivet Grange Pinot Noir.
And in the whole world of wine that's out there, is there one winemaking area that you are looking forward to exploring?
Well, it's interesting. I always love going to Italy, and there are so many wines that we don't get here in California, and little pockets of regions I didn't even sometimes know existed, So, I don't know. I love going. That's one of my favorite places to visit and explore the wine and the food. And it's certainly a place, that experience we talked about earlier of how wine tastes different in a place. And I feel that very much in Italy, that it's part of, the most humble of wines can be just so delicious when you're enjoying it with local produce.
So one of the things that we do at Wine Soundtrack, just to, as we finish up, and I think you'll be very good at this because of your love for music, but the correlation between wine and music. I'm going to name a couple varieties, places, and I want you to tell me what you would listen to or what it makes you think of. And since I know you've done some pairing with your wines, let's start with Pinot Gris.
Well, Pinot Gris, there's different styles of Pinot Gris, but I kind of think maybe Blondie and The Tide is High. It's kind of like, just sort of chilling like that with some Pinot Gris.
Okay. Grower Champagne.
I don't know. I think maybe a little Marriage of Figaro, a little Mozart.
Russian River Pinot Noir.
Ooh, I think maybe the recently departed Aretha Franklin. A little something a little soulful.
and a Napa Cab.
Oh, gosh. That's a harder one to pair. They're always hard to pair. That's the problem with Napa Cabs. Gosh, I don't know.
Okay, let's go back. What about something from a Côte de Rhône?
Yeah, so there I'm thinking, I don't know, something fun, like, I don't know, maybe the Killers.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Kathleen, for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack. And before we go, if you can just remind people where we can find you and your wines.
Yes, well, you can find me online at inmanfamilywines.com. And I'm located here in Sonoma County in the Russian River on the Olivet Road, right in the heart of the Santa Rosa Plain.
So just make an appointment and you can come taste these delicious wines.
Absolutely. I'd love to see you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.